this devlog is all about world building and how I'm putting it in the game. First up, the planet. Who lives here? Colonists. Why? Because their home planets are overpopulated, have huge wealth gaps, and the only way to escape generational poverty and live a better life is to accept a government land grant on a newly terraformed planet. How do they feel about living here? Probably resigned to a life of hardship and danger, but hopeful for a better future one day. How do their children feel about living here? Probably bitter because they watch movies and other media from the home planets and see all these beautiful people with fully optimized sexual orientations and know they will likely never experience that. Now, I'm not the best writer and probably not all of this will end up in the game, but it's fun to world build. Alright, let's get into implementation. First up, the colonist design. They live in a desert, so I figured they'd have to wear sunscreen. What's a biopunk way to do sunscreen? How about they inject special bioengineered melanin that gives them photosynthetic abilities, turns their skin green, and makes them immune to UV radiation. That means they'd probably want to wear clothes that expose as much skin as possible, but I also want their clothes to make them look androgynous because I'm lazy and want to reuse the same 3D model for all of them. So here's the design I came up with, and here it is as a 3D model. It's loosely based on historical clothing from different desert dwelling peoples. I opened up the back because that's a pretty androgynous part of the body and it would be well exposed to the sun when working outside. I also made some accessories I can add to the head to make different looking characters easily. Setting up the colonists in the game was pretty easy. They just use the humanoid NPC class I wrote for the bandits, but have their team set to be the same as the players, so they won't attack you unless you attack them. Also, the existing team's code makes so they'll help you if they see you fighting an enemy. Next up, what do the colonists live in? My first thought was generic sci-fi hab units, but who would actually want to live in something like this? I ended up going with a yurt design because they look cool and they pack well, so it would be easy to ship a bunch to the planet. To give more variety to the yurts, I wrote a shader that takes their world position, generates a random color, and applies it to the walls. And now it's really easy for me to have diverse looking towns. Now for quests, for these I'll need a way to talk to the NPCs. I set up a dialogue manager for controlling text display and responses you can make. I wrote all the dialogue and stuff in JSON files by hand because that's the easiest way I found to do it. I wanted to do some kind of text-to-speech thing like Animal Crossing has to give actual voices to the characters, so I watched some videos on how Animal Crossing's system worked and built my own. Here it is in action. Okay, so here's how it works. There's one vowel sound that's played constantly, an ooh, and that's pitched up and down based on the last vowel that was displayed. Then there are consonant sounds played over that. Here it is with just the consonants. And here it is again with both. I exaggerated the consonants a lot to make them sound more interesting as well, and I think the final product is pretty cool. It actually sounds like a language. After that, it was pretty easy to implement quests. I just made a quest manager singleton that has a list of conditions that have been set, so whenever I choose a specific dialogue option or do something specific in the game, I can have it trigger a condition to be set. And then when displaying dialogue options or deciding if, say, a door has been unlocked, I just check the quest manager to see if certain conditions have been set or not. I also made a journal for the player, and it was really easy to link this to the quest manager. I just had to write a JSON file of journal entries that get added when certain conditions are set in the quest manager. And I made a compass you can follow NPC's directions easily. It's just a bunch of text clipped to a rectangle and moved left or right based on your rotation. Then I just had to make a bunch of content. I wrote quests and dialogues, added new areas, fleshed out the world, tweaked the boss fight, and generally made everything a lot more polished. I also added an intro cinematic. I made this cool looking planet and set up a scene where you see your spacecraft flying towards it. I think it sets the scene pretty well and also hints at the places you'll go in the game. I also did a ton of performance improvements. First, the arm's inverse kinematics was a bit costly, so I made so that NPCs that are idling will freeze their arm positions because they don't need to move them when they're idling. It's not really noticeable that they're frozen. I also freeze NPCs' movement when they're idling, since just applying gravity to them when they're standing still was having a pretty noticeable performance cost. I also noticed the player's procedural hair was a bit costly, so I rewrote it in C# and got about a 10 frame per second improvement. I think this was because I was looping through a few thousand vertices every frame when calculating their positions, and compiled languages are a lot better at big loops like that than interpreted languages are. I should note that this is the first time in 4 years of using Godot that I have found a situation where C# is actually noticeably better than GD script. Now, the biggest optimization I did was just disabling NPCs that are past a certain distance. The way this works is that the player has a large activation area, and every NPC has a physical trigger object that locks to their position. When one of these triggers enters or exits the player's activation area, the NPC will be added to or removed from the scene, so that way they don't get rendered and none of their code is run when it doesn't need to be. And this lets me have tons of NPCs all over the world without affecting my frame rate. And that's all for this devlog. The desert area is pretty much done. I'll be moving on to a new biome in the next video. As usual, back me on Patreon to play the demos, buy my courses on Udemy to learn how to make a game like this, and follow me on Twitch to watch me work on the game live. And I've also set up a repository for free, commercially usable, retro-style 3D graphics if you're interested in that. Links in the description for everything.